their operating transfer in was $917,000. So we, right off the bat, to get, this has been institutionalized support for the operation of the juvenile hall was $917,000. Now there's another $112,000 that we bring in from the rural health services, a transfer in, so that kind of offsets that $112,000 in terms of the medical care budget paid. That's part of this $1.5 million. And then you got, all the miscellaneous revenues. Now how much in terms of segregating what really belongs to the regular probation office and what goes to juvenile hall. I mean, I think we need to refine and map that out, and Julie is somebody I think could very easily put those kind of numbers together if the new acting interim CO wants to pursue it in terms of breaking down what those $260,000 in revenues that are being credited that offsets this $1,300,000 that convinces the judge that we're only, it's $1,050,000 is what juvenile hall is costing us. But then there was another item that we learned, the court fines, which is general fund discretionary, and this was one that Karen kind of gave up that, years ago when the juvenile, we didn't have a juvenile hall, but we just had like a probation item in the budget, and there's fines that come in, and it's a general fund discretionary, and it was probably at the time when it was introduced back in the 80s or early 90s or whatever, it was probably, a couple $100,000, $150,000 that we were generating. But that item has been sort of kind of segregated and has been credited as being a probation revenue, but it's $620,000. So you take that, that's general fund money, that could be allocated to anything. You could allocate it to any other department, to the sheriff, to the tax collector's office, whatever you wanted to do. So in reality what we learned was, when you take the $917,000 and the $620,000, right there is over $1.5 million. So part of that $620,000 is going to regular probation, part of it's going to support the juvenile hall. And then on top of that, we're still like we were short like 120-some thousand or 150,000. So when you zero it all in, you got $250,000 in real revenue that comes from outside of the general fund to support a $1.5 million program in essence. And I think that's the reality. So when obviously the judge, she's good at doing what she's doing, but I don't think she has the correct information. And I would have to say that the budget information that we acted on, I have to say with a lot of comfort, is correct. So that's what drives me to ask the questions. Well, then you back up, and I want to go to Mr. Nichols, and I'll be done with my comments. Mr. Nichols' memo of these dated November 27th for the last week's board meeting, which was carried over to today. We have a lot of just breakdowns. I mean, he shows the $1.3 million and minus the $260,000, and that's where the $1,040. Obviously, the judge is apparently tying into that. And then he runs down through all the transportation costs, and we have a lot of lump sums. And if we go to Yuba County route, it's going to be $957,000. We go to Tama County route, it's going to be this. We talked about paying off accumulated leave and unemployment insurance. I mean, trying to quantify what the cost would be to kind of close that. But I have to say, these are all just numbers. They're like, I don't know if they're numbers that are pulled out of the thing, but I want to see the work papers that back up these numbers to really appreciate that, especially when it comes to, okay, this is option A where we are today and we're spending, and this is option B, or what it would cost if we do something different. And so, I'm sure that there's a lot that break these down, but I want to see, we got staffing, $227,000. Is that one person? Is that 10 people?
Well, that's on page 6, 7, and 8 of the board packet that Mr. Nichols provided.
I don't have a page. Mr. Nichols' memo stops with the board at page 4, and then we have the judge's letter, and then we have all the background stuff from 10 years ago, and so we're at a disadvantage of not having the details. So I think that's something that's going to be a critical factor for us to zero in on. And I'm not saying, I'll be the first to say, going the transportation route is not going to be cheap. And I'm not necessarily saying we need to close the juvenile hall. I'm just saying if we're going to have a juvenile hall and it's going to be a regional facility, we have to go back to that original commitments that were made back when this thing was born years ago, okay, in terms of the shared relationship with the other counties. And the cost cannot be 100% borne or 95% borne by the taxpayers of Lassen County. And it's not a question of pitting these monies against other functions in county government or other programs that want to be a part of county government. I mean, this thing needs to be looked at in a very close way. Now, we talk about, and the concern is, the county's like broke, this is like a hole in the side of the fiscal shit. And in 10 years' time, if we're not broke now, and I don't think we are, we've got money. But if we're not broke now, we will be broke in 10 years if this is the direction we keep going in.
Okay. Richard's got a comment, then Larry. Richard will be fast. Richard will be
It
fast.
just occurs to me that the crux of the issue is that Lassen County is experiencing all the burden of the capacity that goes unutilized in the facility, which is not, I think, the intent of the original regional nature of the facility where all the counties would share in that capacity that's not utilized. And perhaps we should review our fee structure as how we charge those counties and find out if it's as, if it's as important as the other counties indicate it is to them, then perhaps they'd be willing to share in the cost of maintaining the facility that isn't 100% utilized.
And I think the fee structure review that Jennifer has offered, including dealing with this group home in there, I think those are long overdue and are very appropriate along that same line.
Okay, Larry.
Yeah, thank you. Forgot what I was gonna say.
You've been on hold for a long time.
No, I'm,
We finally winded Jim down.
It's in the detail.
like the gentleman from MODOC said, when he was asked, what do they allocate, what's in your budget for juvenile hall, he said $22,000 and it spikes up to $100. Well, I mean, every year, ours is a $1 million plus hit to the budget. And when I went through this too, that's what I was thinking. The thing is that it's obvious that the hall serves, 3 counties pretty much equally. And it needs to be like that. We shouldn't have a per bed charge, and when it's vacant, we suffer the consequence. If it's a tri-county deal, it shouldn't be a $1 million hit to us, a $22,000 to you, and $78,000 to Plumas or whatever it is. And the need for the juvenile hall, I think, has been clearly demonstrated, and I'm in full support of keeping it, but not at the expense of our taxpayers. We've allowed ourselves to be abused in this deal, really, and that needs to stop. That we need to truly be 3 counties that are 3 partners paying for the facility that serves 3 counties, and it's quite simple. I think as soon as possible we need to get those figures, what the juvenile hall clearly costs, and I would minus out the revenue we receive from MODOC and Plumas, just what it costs to run it. But there was mention of different doctors and stuff, but minus that, just what does it cost to have this facility, the electricity, the staffing, and to receive these kids? And that cost needs to be, if it's not split equally between the 3 parties, it needs to be, a lot closer than it is now. And obviously, we need to take into account the other counties' cost of transportation to get to Susanville, and surely, there's good data to come up with good numbers on that from both your county and Plumas. And those things need to be supplied to our CAO quickly, so we could address this. So we need to, I believe, have a good indication of where we're going in these cost shares, so we could, and this stuff needs to be implemented prior to the end of our fiscal year. So next year, instead of budgeting, $1.1 million, maybe the county, our side's gonna be $600,000. And that was what we said at the budget. It wasn't really to close it was to find out how we could maintain juvenile hall at a lesser hit to our general fund. And the current situation where you folks just pay whenever you have the need isn't gonna cut it anymore, as far as I'm concerned.
Aaron?
Yeah, I got a question for MODOC while he's here. In MODOC County, how do you guys work that? Do the parents, do they pay some of the costs to the county for juvenile detention?
No. because I would probably say 99.9% of the juveniles that we're dealing with, parents, don't have the money. And even if we requested through the courts, there any attorneys here? Probably not.
Yes.
Basically, you know, the attorneys for the juveniles and stuff, more or less, I can say it's wine, so to the point that, Your Honor, you know, the minors' parents don't have anything, they're on aid, they're on this, they're on that, and so the courts don't, you know, don't impose it.
And then, my second question is going back to Modoc County with the city of Alturas. I mean, does the city help pay for any of the stuff, the police department, the city police department? I mean, or is that just kind of like how Lassen County is, they just take them to jail and it's the county?
Well, correct. Basically, if a minor is picked up within the city of Alturas, they'll call the sheriff. We show up at you know, if it's after hours, we show up at our office, take custody of the juvenile, and basically they don't charge us for that. Same thing with the sheriff's department. If they have to transport them 70 miles into Alturas and stuff, it's basically what they call is the nature of the job, so to speak. You know, they don't, you know, charge our department for, you know, for their time and service.
Any more questions from the board?
And the approximate amount that MoDOT and Plumas pay is $38,000.
How much?
$38,000
$38,000.
A piece or cumulative?
together. That was what it was for
When is it?
for the 12-13 year. That's how much they're approximately.
I mean, you know, it's just so lopsided, it's ridiculous, and it needs to be more fair and equitable.
You know, I think the other thing, Mr. Chairman, that we brought this out last week, and I know Mr. Davey and I debated this particular point here this past week as well, you know, is the sheriff, when it comes to incarcerating and housing the adult population, I mean, it's like 23 to 29,000. That was not a recent figure. I'm not sure where we are. I know when we built the state, when we were taking care of state inmates in the CCF, it was, you know, kind of a low dollar amount in that kind of range. The last I recall, it's probably changed a lot with all the federal health care mandates that the courts have imposed on the state prison system. But they were an inmate at the state prison, it cost them like $45,000 to like $60,000. And when you take the number of wards that we're dealing with, and the fact that, you know, and you get basically punished for being doing a good job, I guess, in this respect. But when you take, you know, the average of 8, and even if you have a spike up to 13 or 12, I mean, it was a facility that was built for 30 beds, and we haven't seen a lot of activity, and so they mothballed half the facility, so it's really functioning as a 20-bed facility, and we're dealing with an average population of around 8, whether they're all Lassen County kids or the Lassen County, maybe 1 or 2 coming from the adjoining counties. So when you divide that into the budgets that we're dealing with, I mean, you're looking at amounts of $150,000, $200,000 per kid. And I think when you look at that disparity in terms of budget, maybe that's what makes, you know, the whole concept, you know, kind of bizarre. Is I mean, people complain about how much we spend, you know, for like the state prison inmates, and if we really understood what we're paying for the juvenile side, that's where I think, you know, I'm committed and want to see the juvenile hall, you know, remain as a functioning component within the community. But we've got to bring those costs into bounds, and I think that, you know, we've got new staff, relatively new staff that's committed, and I think we need to work with them to try to put together that old model that existed early on that worked maybe for a year or 2 or whatever. But, you know, it's not a money maker, but it's not supposed to be a money loser of the magnitude that it's become. And I think that's what we need to try to resolve in the next 3 to 6 months, because it puts in jeopardy the ability for that long term. And what's amazing to me is that this thing has been creeping up for like the last 10 years, and it seems like every time they bring it into the board, you know, when the board kind of focuses in on it, what Bruce shared with me was the Juvenile Justice Committee gets reports on a monthly basis, and they deal with these numbers, and they, you know, this is nothing new to them because they're focusing on it. Whether that information is trickling to the judge through their reports, I don't know. But it's not trickling to this board, and we're the ones that are paying the bill. So I think, for the near future, we need to tune in to the reporting information that the Juvenile Justice Commission is receiving dealing with these budgets and stuff, so that we have a greater appreciation, one, of what they're doing, and two, look for ways in which we can maybe improve upon the money end, so that we don't find ourselves having to turn off the lights.
And I understand that, because when we look at the total amount of bookings, there was 172 bookings. But when you try to average that out between violations of probation, was this one ward, that went in 5 times? Was it which way? There's a million ways to present those numbers.
Well, you have
So-
8 basic beds being used. You could have 1 kid that occupies it for the full year, or you might have 100 kids occupy the 1 bed over the course of the year.
And we can probably provide like a monthly breakdown, to how many juveniles were booked into juvenile hall for that month, how many were from out of county, how many were in county, and just kind of provide you
Well,
with some of that.
I do know as a
But-
result of the 2003-4 stuff that's in the packet, the board did get for a period of time there, kind of monthly or periodic reports on progress being made to try to hold and contain those particular costs. But we haven't seen anything in 5 or 6 years now.
Okay, and I can definitely do that if you so wish, but, one of the things that we really gotta look at, and I really agree with the sheriff in this, we've gotta look at what is gonna be, a 5-year plan and a 10-year plan, kind of, where do we go with our entire justice, community, and all of us working together to figure out, how do we get there, what's gonna be best? How are we gonna be able to serve the populations that we're gonna serve? Because we may see a spike in the adult, right now, and then that'll last for 5 years, and juveniles, we won't have much of a population, but then it's gonna flip-flop, or something like that. So I think that we need to continue working collaboratively to be able to figure out what's gonna be the best for our county.
One last thing. And, given the fact that this is a regional model, and because of the fact that we do have, and this kind of just came to mind while Larry was talking, and that is, you got 3 counties, and we form a lot of joint powers agreements or authorities. Maybe what we need to look at doing is establishing a JPA with the other 2 counties to be basically an independent entity that's responsible for operating this facility, and then each county puts in they put in what their per head costs are, and then whatever the other part of it, whether it's on a population basis, allocated by a formula per capita, whatever, but in each of the 3 counties would share, you might say, the unfunded portion of the operation, in order to have this as a guaranteed facility. So it would not be necessarily a Lassen County facility. It would be a facility that would be operated like we do with the city of Susanville for our solid waste, and we do for, the ambulance thing for the Northern California. We have a lot of these JPAs. We have a 5-county JPA for our senior service programs and their funding and everything. So there is a vehicle there that maybe we might want to look at when we talk to the other 2 counties, is transitioning this facility out of being just something that's Lassen County only, and turn it over to an authority that would have representatives from those 3 county boards sit on and operate with.
Yeah, you say, you do need to look into the future and see where that's going and all that. And there's things we're always gonna be needing to do, but I think what we need to do as quickly as possible is make sure we don't have to allocate another $1.1 million in the next budget cycle. And I think that's what we should be focused on, whether it's the forming of the JPA or getting a commitment from the other 2 counties, but we need to, as quickly as possible, sometime in January, get what those real costs are, and then work out how to share it. And let's work out a way to keep it open, keep everybody employed, keep the asset going for the community and the other 2, but not all on our shoulders.
Okay, anybody else in the public wish to speak? Bruce, come up.
Morning, I'm Bruce Davey, and member of the Juvenile Justice Commission, and as Mr. Chapman indicated, he and I have had some conversations last week So a lot of what I have to say at this point in time, I would rather not waste your time with, because I simply wanted to make sure after last week's meeting that all of you were on board with the idea and the concept that it will not save you $1 million to close the hall. That simply will not happen. It might cost that much or more to run the hall, but that is not a savings figure. The savings figure you will arrive at will depend upon what the hall costs versus what the alternative costs. And that is a much smaller number than whether it's 100,000 or 200,000. I think the discussion today indicates that you're of a mind, all of you, to determine that cost more accurately than the report that I was going to use as a baseline for this discussion. So I don't want to waste your time with those types of calculations. I don't think it's relevant unless there's someone here who thinks that you're going to save $1 million. If you believe that, we're still in the wilderness.
Bruce, I think what our idea is to have this cost sharing amongst the three counties. That's our idea.
I think there's a lot of things that should be looked at.
Yeah.
Cost sharing, I think that there's some very wise suggestions about looking at 5-year plans and long-term things, because short-term costs frequently are assets and resources that are disposed of. They're not recoverable and they don't lead to a more positive solution. What I would like to do is to reinforce some of the things about what Juvenile Justice Commission does, and that is we do not discuss the budget of juvenile hall every month. We meet once a month. Juvenile hall budgets are something that we have visited periodically, but not every month. And I am not, and I don't think any of us are experts on all of the costs of running the juvenile hall. You have resources in the county to derive those numbers. I think you should use those resources to get those figures and not ask me to shoot from the hip. I do believe that your savings will be much less than $1 million if you close the hall. You may save some money as opposed to the alternative in transporting, but as soon as you start to transport, you incur some unintended costs. And those unintended results could be the fact that our juveniles are exposed, at least a lot of them will be less sophisticated than their cellmates when they go to facilities in the valley, and that may well result in them coming back home, being educated to a higher crime style that results in more losses, whether it be vandalism, or theft, or just outright physical harm to the community. And all of those things that increase community costs, reduce the assets that our community has to fund community service, and whether it's from individuals or businesses, crime has an impact, and that's why we try to fight it. Our focus at the commission has been to try to recharacterize the behavior of the juveniles that end up in detention. Juvenile hall is kind of the last stop. What else can you do with a child that's at that level? I mean, there's really nowhere else to go. CYA is not something that continues to be functional in the state of California. In fact, the extra 20 beds that we added on to juvenile hall, the first 20 was for a normal population. The extra 20 was additional grant money that was allocated by the state for quote-unquote hard beds, because at the time, I believe the state was contemplating shutting CYA down. They needed somewhere to send the hard criminals, and the idea was, you guys, they came from your county, you keep them, and you need a facility to deal with them, because you don't want to mix up with the other population. So the hall, as it's constructed, there's two halves, and there's a hard half and a soft half, and the hard half has evolved into something that we're not using, and it's been mothballed, as Jim said. So that's why it exists, and not that we expected to have 40 youth shortly in this general population. We have been up as high as the 20 number. We've gotten to the point where that was a situation, and I think originally some of those hard beds were used for the kids who needed to be separated from the other population for a short period of time while they were totally out of control. We don't want to forget that our purpose is to correct the behavior so that even if it costs $100,000 per bed, if we're rotating 5 kids through there and we save 3 or 4 of them, that's 3 or 4 lifetimes of crime that we've taken off the street that we're not paying $29,000 a year for the rest of their life. That's the goal. And I think that as we move forward and think about the facilities that we need to have and what we're going to do, that needs to be number one in our thinking is what can we do, whether it's the Juvenile Justice Commission or the County Board of Supervisors, to intervene in behavior that is very costly and can continue for a lifetime if we don't interrupt it. And I think that's number one. So the other things that have been discussed as far as the risk of transportation and so on, all add into it. And Lassen County has borne the brunt of the economic burden, and maybe there's a way to reallocate that. We also have some benefits in the employment results that are beneficial to Lassen County residents. And if we transport juveniles out of county, that $1 million that we spend for services out of county, a large part of it goes to employees in other counties. And so there's some give and takes that are going to be very hard to quantize. And so I suggest, I think you're on track to get accurate numbers that you can believe in and make a decision that's based on those, but keep some other things in mind that can't be quantized. And I don't know that you can put a dollar cost on it, but I don't expect that you're going to arrive at a solution that saves $1 million per year. I just don't think that's possible.
Thank you, Bruce. Anybody else? Dave?
Good morning. All right, good morning, Dean Grouden, Sheriff Coroner. Obviously our justice system has changed significantly over recent years. The jail has seen huge impacts, and also the juvenile hall has seen some changes. That regional model really never developed to the degree that was proposed originally. And I think the JPA would be the simplest, fast potential solution for you guys. Because obviously we know that even though their people aren't there, we still have to pay the light bill, we still have to keep the building heated, we still have to maintain our good staff that work that facility. So there are a lot of ongoing costs that I agree we've been bearing the burden on behalf of the 3 counties. In the end, they might decide that it's cheaper to go somewhere else, and if they do that, then at least we know our answer. Then we know that this is our facility and we don't have to worry about them. I mean, hopefully we can work out a partnership. We have great partnerships with MODOC and Columbus, but at this stage, I do think that they need to help out with some cost sharing. Now, I put a lot of information in the letter. I appreciate if you take the time to read them when you have an opportunity. But the most significant point I want to make is, I don't believe that neither the jail nor the juvenile hall in the current configuration are going to meet our long-term future needs. I know the jail isn't meeting our current needs. We're overpopulation, especially on females, but we have significant classification issues. We're getting people for longer terms. And I've told you guys all this before, so I don't want to rehash it. But obviously we have a lot of problems in the jail, primarily associated with more sophisticated, more violent offenders. And the building was built for people that were supposed to be there a year or less, and some people for serious crimes pre-trial. And now that's totally shifted, and we feel that change every day in that building. The other significant weakness we have right now is we don't have medical or mental health beds designed specifically for that purpose. Recently we had one person in our custody who was severely mentally ill. There was no way, based on the law, to get her sentence changed and get her released to treatment, so we had to retain her for her term. And for a couple weeks, she was in crisis, so we ended up having to keep her in our intake area, which in what would be a detox cell, because it had a rubber floor, didn't have a bed she could jump off or anything like that. But it's just not right from any perspective. But it's the only option we had. But there's a liability associated with those things. The other real weaknesses we have is we don't have facilities. If someone comes in with tuberculosis or some other highly contagious disease, we need cells that have separate air systems to keep them segregated and not infect our staff or the other offenders. These are all things that other counties are either building or already have, and we just don't have those. And we just we flat out need more segregated space. So, you know, I don't have any, my goal isn't to take over juvenile hall. My goal, Jim and I work great together. You know, we've had a lot of discussions about this, but I think it's important, it's an important time right now for us to decide, you know, what we're gonna do